Assalamualaikum. Hello and good morning everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here this morning, on this very wet morning actually, for the very first RegTalk organized by Futurise in the year 2021. Let me introduce myself first. I am Haslyna Hashim. I'm the General Counsel for Futurise. So for those, I'm sure you're all aware, but just a bit of a background on Futurise. Futurise was established in 2017 with a mandate from the government to conduct the National Regulatory Sandbox Initiative, which aims to expedite regulatory regulatory intervention, by allowing a controlled regulatory testing environment. And some of the NRS initiatives we've worked on include that for UAV or drones, mobile nannies, and also self-driving cars. So Futurise is also a public policy advisor for the future economy, and we have a thought leadership program called Ideas, under which we falls the RegTalk that you're attending today. So we hold a RegTalk once every quarter and invite subject matter experts to discuss topics about the future economy vis-a-vis the regulations required to govern them. So we have, I believe, a very interesting topic for you this morning. It's a very topical title, seeing as we're still in the midst of the COVID vaccination. And our title today is Regulating Genetic Data. Just a bit of background for people who are not subject matter experts today, but are laymen like me. Genome sequencing has enabled researchers to study and map an organism's set of DNA, which has led to very many uses. For example, in the field of medicine, I understand it's led to better detection, diagnosis and treatment. And with new NGS or next generation sequencing technologies, the cost has dropped very low to a couple of $1,000 now, to sequence an entire genome. So we also have direct to consumer test kits where you can obtain multiple reports ranging from your health to weight management, I understand, right? I think that is what GENOMAS is doing, right, Mr. Thuvendran? And I think a lot of people will come to see you after this for this weight management. And we also have things like looking at a person's roots and ancestry, and of course health. But of course, at what cost are all these advancements to our privacy and to our personal data? There's a massive amount of information and data being entrusted to third parties. And are our laws really ready for this? That's what we're looking at today. Are our laws ready for this, and how do we balance the protection of individual rights, data protection rights, while still fostering growth in our fledgling genomics industry? Okay, so I think we're all quite excited to know more about this area, because I know I am, and we have for you a great lineup of experts in this field. Please let me introduce them to you. On my left, we have Dr. Adiratna who is here as a representative for the Ministry of Health. Dr. Adiratna is an immunologist at the Institute for Medical Research, IMR, and she heads the primary immunodeficiency unit, with her lab currently being the National Referral Lab for PIDS, which it means rare genetic disorders of the immune system. Okay, next to Dr. Adiratna, we have Encik Muhammad Noor, who is a representative from the Malaysia Genome Institute. He is the head of Advanced Genome and Bioinformatics, specializing in genome informatics and molecular biology, right? So I understand that he's worked on various projects, whole genome sequencing, including animal, plant, microbial genome, and metagenomics, right? And so among the projects that he's worked on, I find very interesting is that he's currently working on a COVID-19 genome sequencing for local patient samples and coordinating a COVID-19 genomics surveillance database, right? And what I find very interesting as well is that you're currently working on 5 species of Rafflesia, 3 iguanas, 3 crabs and 2 stingless bee genomes. Now that's a very interesting job description. Okay. Next to him, of course, this is a regulatory talk, a RegTalk. Obviously, we couldn't do this if we don't have a legal expert. So we have here Mr. Raj. I'm going to try and pronounce your name. Mr. Nadarashnaraj Sargunaraj. Did I do okay? Okay. All right. So Mr. Raj is a partner of ZICO, which is the largest law firm in the country. Yeah. And he heads the corporate commercial and technology practice group. One of the areas of his specialization is personal data protection, yeah, which I think is very relevant to our topic today. And our final, but no least special panelist for today is Mr. Thuvendran, who is from GENOMAS, a genomic industry player, and currently the first Malaysia-based consumer DNA testing company, correct? Yep, okay. And he is a man of many talents, actually. He's a geophysicist by qualification, and Mr. Thuvendran has also worked as a research scientist and was responsible to come up with the ideation and commercialization of very novel technologies in sports technology and smart wearables. Currently, he is the Director of Corporate and Operational Strategy for GENOMAS. Yep. So we have a very interesting, very well-credentialed set of panelists today, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion. So let's start now. Just a bit of background. Our topic today was actually brought to our attention by one of our panelists, GENOMAS, because they came to us and contacted us regarding genetic data regulation as a potential sandbox issue. So it's fitting, I think, that we start the discussion by addressing the first question to Mr. Thuvendran. So Mr. Thuvendran, can you please share with us what GENOMAS is doing in this genomic space? And perhaps share with us also the regulatory hurdles that you've had to face so far.
Good morning, all. Okay, basically, GENOMAS is a private limited company that was incorporated last year, and we actually approached National Sports Institute of Malaysia with an idea, in which later we jointly developed, which is to actually profile athletes based on their genetic affinities, which is, the main idea is to go into grassroots talent scouting. And at the same time, it expanded into nutrigenomics, and we moved along together in partnership, and currently GENOMAS is a government affiliated company in which ISN has minority stakeholdership. And with that spirit, we have actually combined together and put in input for National Transformation Plan for Sports under RMK12, and currently we are actually spearheading towards that. And despite government affiliation in our company, we are a business entity. And as a business entity, we have to make revenues. So our initial business canvas was D2C, which is direct to customer basis, in which we provide genetic testing services. We approach the public, and the public able to source this service from us. Okay. Before I actually get more into GENOMAS, it's better for me to actually segregate and explain how genomic industry actually first works in order to actually postulate where GENOMAS sits in there. If you look at the supply chain of the genomic industry, the first players are the technology inventors. Technology inventors are the drivers. And sadly, we do not have any technology inventors in the region. It's actually controlled entirely by the US and also the Europe. Second is basically the laboratories. They are sequencing providers. They provide the facilities. And third is basically the people like us, D2C. So we bring these services to the people. And how we package and do them, it depends on specific models in which it is actually based on specific business entities. And then comes the research part. The research is actually quite extensive because it has the potential to bifurcate the industry into more potentialities. And this is where Mr. Muhammad Noor sits. So basically, when we first approached ISN and we actually did our groundwork, on identifying what hurdles we have, we found out that there is actually a very silo operations within the Malaysian industry between these 4 segments, which is why we are not able to propel genetic industry in the country. Also, reason being because there is no comprehensive integrated policy which encompasses these 4 segments in the genetic supply chain. So knowing this hurdle, we have been working with ISN and coming up with some possible solutions. And one of the solutions in which we independently arrive, which so happens that it agrees with the findings by Academic of Sciences Malaysia for precision medicine, is that there needs to be a national data bank for genetics, centralized, coordinated. Second, there needs to be a national biobank, which is regulated. And on top of that, we actually found out also that there needs to be a free space for the free market to operate. Because, like it or not, any industry, its growth depends on investment and funding, and that is very much dependent on capitalist approach. So that's where we are actually coming in partnership with ISN.
Right. Did you find that there is perhaps a lacuna or areas, grey areas, while looking into your projects? Did you see any grey areas in regulation?
Grey areas is the main challenge that we have. The grey area itself is the main challenge because we do not have a definitive answer in which we can approach a particular, like for example, let's say we are going to collect DNA samples from our customers. Where and how we are going to handle the specimen? There's no definitive answer to it. Although we can do it in any way that we like, but is that the ethical way to do it? That's the question that arises. Second, what about the data? At what point the patient, or sorry, at what point the customer seizes his or her rights on the data? Does personal identifier carry out until the end of the supply chain? Yes or no? We do not know that. What are the rights conferred to the customer? What are the rights conferred to business entities like GENOMAS? What are the rights conferred to researchers? If we are too limiting towards the progress, then I'm afraid that our progress will be slowed down. So policies need to answer this. Grey area itself is a challenge.
All right. That is very interesting. You say that one of the issues is your handling of the data, you're not sure, but also the rights to the data from the beginning to the end of the supply chain. So it sounds to me like there is actually a different set of rights from the end to the beginning. Sorry, from the beginning to the end. Yeah. Can you explain that a bit?
Okay. When we are actually trying to devise a policy paper, we need to look at the functionality of the data. And the more functions you find for the data, the more regulations they need to introduce to it. And when these regulations are introduced to it, it becomes a segregated siloed regulations which has no comprehensive umbrella. So what really happens is that once you actually get a data from the customer, for example, we know who actually we're getting it from, and we are selling a certain amount of information to the customer, functional information, which has a personal identifier attached to it. That has a different prerogative right towards data for the customer as opposed to data that has no personal identifier. For example, population studies. Population studies, I am not entitled to actually, the protection entitlement is not as much as if there is a personal identifier. So at what point this disappears needs to be clarified.
I see. So the boundaries and the limits to which this protection is given, yeah, that's one of your issues.
And also to add, we have raw data, we have processed data, and these two different data, once we get into the industry, we are sharing for interoperability. and how the sharing is going to work, there is no mechanism regulating it.
Okay. All right, that's really very enlightening, I think, for those of us who are not very familiar with this area. And I think right now is the correct time for me to call on Mr. Raj, yeah? I mean, you've listened to what Mr. Thuvendran had to say. He says there's no clear guidelines on the handling of data, and especially the rights to data from the beginning to the end of the supply chain, as well as how you deal with raw data as opposed to processed data. So as an expert in this area, yeah, can you share with us what do you see as the current laws that are applicable to this area, yeah, and whether they're adequate?
Okay, I agree in terms of business. Hello. Okay. So I agree in terms from clients and also from our experience dealing with industry. Industry needs clarity to do business, and that's very important. So what are the laws that we have now when it comes to genomics or even genetic data is two big buckets. One is the law of general application. This is the law that applies to all industries, which is the Personal Data Protection Act. What triggers the PDPA is personally identifiable information. As long as that data can identify Raj, and Raj does these things, then that data is regulated under the PDPA. Apart from the law of general application, you've got sector-specific regulation. So this sector-specific regulation only applies to certain sectors. Financial services is one, that's not so relevant here, but you also talk about medical data and also data that's handled by private healthcare facilities, which comes under, of course, Mohd, and that's regulated that way. Now, I'm going to focus on the PDPA because we're talking about commercialization and the use of data for technology advancement as opposed to government use. So the PDPA is triggered, as I mentioned, when the data is personally identifiable, and number two, if it is for a commercial transaction. That is defined very widely. No need to go into any details. Any form of commerce involved in that processing triggers the PDPA. The good news is, or at least for point, it doesn't apply to the government. So as long as it's been done by government, ministries, or public bodies, then the PDPA doesn't apply. So you do have got these frameworks in place for data in terms of genomics data and also, to a broader sense, medical health data. Now, you brought up about the grey areas. The PDPA is drafted very widely. Why? And rightfully so, because it's meant to apply to a vast amount of industry. However, the law is actually quite dynamic in the sense that there are provisions in the Act where industry is allowed to propose certain codes to say, within your general framework, we as an industry would like to propose, say, a code of conduct. And that code of conduct can be submitted to Jabatan Perlindungan Data Peribadi, and for them to assess to see, yeah, this works for this industry and I'm registering it. Those businesses operating within that class of data users are able to follow that rules specific to them and comply with the Act. It is not very popularly used, but if you see the bigger industries like the financial services, banks, insurance, Tenaga Nasional, and also the aviation sector, communications and multimedia sector, they have come up with their own codes. So within the huge umbrella PDPA, you have got very, very specific verticals that apply to industry. Perhaps that is an avenue that genomics industry can look into when it comes to compliance.
I see. Okay, you mentioned something quite interesting. You said that the PDPA does not apply to the government, right? What happens then if you have a situation where, a government agency is working together, say with GENOMAS? How do you deal with that data then?
So how we look at that is so there are two very legal jargons. It's very boring, but let me just explain to you so that at least I get my point. The Act applies. The Act has a set of processing rules, which means typically you go into any supermarket or something, they ask for your consent, they give you this privacy notice, we say, I can use everything about your data to all these things, right? So these are compliance obligations. These compliance obligations apply to what we call as a data user. These are the categories of individuals, for example, like GENOMAS, who uses the data for their own purpose, okay? But it doesn't apply to a data processor. The data processor doesn't have to come and get consent from you, generally. So like, for example, if you take a set of data and give it to your IT service provider, cloud service provider, who is processing the data for GENOMAS, GENOMAS has to comply with the data processing principles, but the data processor does not. So into your question, if let's say a government agency is hiring or engaging companies like GENOMAS to to do certain research for the government. The question arises, and the answer is a bit difficult, but the question is, who is the data user in that scenario and who is the data processor? If the government is the data user in that scenario, all the benefits of the research goes to the government, then the question is, does the PDP even apply?
Okay. So based on what you've actually explained to us, I suppose in answer to Mr. Thuvendran's dilemma right now, the answer is for us to look back to the industry itself. Yeah. So there is a certain level of self-regulation allowed.
Yes. So the Act was drafted in a way, there are provisions which can be explored to see whether industry can self-regulate. And that means a lot, because the best people to regulate is industry itself. They know the nuances, the integrities, the pain points in the industry, and it's for them to propose, say for example, a code to the government in this area, the Jabatan Perlindungan Data Peribadi, to say, look, we think that these are provisions or rules that would be specific, targeted and effective when it comes to regulating genomics data. So that is something that can be explored.
I mean, it would be interesting to find out what Mr. Thuvendran's view is on this, but we will talk about that in a little while. In the meantime, I'm just going to move over to Dr. Adiratna. Yeah? Okay, as a representative from the MOH and seeing the growth of the genomic space right now, can you share with us how MOH sees its role in this area?
Genomic role, yeah. I mean, it is something that is advancing very quickly, and it is something that's very useful for our patients. For us, we think that genomic data does bring a lot of important, important function there, where we can identify the mutation in certain genetic diseases, for example. As for me, because I'm a researcher, so I look into rare diseases. So the information from the genomic data would identify the variation of certain diseases, and we can inform the patients or the parents about the disease, and they can actually get treatment for that specific disease. So for us, genomic data is something that we need to explore, and because a lot of rare diseases, you just cannot do targeted type of sequencing because you just don't know what it is. So genomic data is the way to go now.
I see. So the way I see it, MOH looks at this as a very important growth area, yes? So you will be encouraging advancements in this area. Do you feel that this is an initiative that falls only on MOH, or should you be working with other ministries? And if yes, which other ministries?
I think we need to work with all agencies. For example, higher education, KPT, and also industries, to bring this together, because we know that for this kind of technology is expensive. So we need a lot of funding and put them together, and perhaps not duplicating work, so that we can bring this agenda further. Yeah.
Okay. You heard from Mr. Raj just now that he says that our laws somewhat allows for self-regulation by the industry. How do you feel about this? Do you feel that the industry should be allowed to regulate themselves? Like basically hands off from the ministry?
I do not know much about the law and the legal part of this, but as long as they are working within the self-regulating area that they are allowed to, I think that's fine, because we, for example, for me, we cannot do all types of genomics type of research, but they may provide for the people who can afford it, for example, for wellness, for different types of objectives. So I would think that for me, it is fine.
Okay, all right. Do you agree with this, the rest of the panel? I don't know, perhaps Mr. Raj, you have something to say?
I just want a very quick example before, so I don't take too much of time. I was in a conference last year, no, year before, I think, and this panelist gave a very nice example, and credit to her, not to me actually. So she gave an example on the differentiation between government, policymakers, and also industry. How do you regulate? It's like parents with kids. The duty of the parent is to make sure that the house, the home is conducive for play, to fight, and also to collaborate, the children, right? And you cannot always tell your kids, no, 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 because your kids will never listen, right? What you need to do is make sure you have nice padding so that when they fight and kick each other, they don't knock their heads anywhere. That's the job of the parent. The parent only intervenes when there's blood. Only then you bring your rotan and come and say, look, somebody's going to get hurt today because you've broken the rules. Apart from that, the children should be allowed to play, should be allowed to collaborate, should be allowed to fight, compete, right? When I say fight, it means compete. Now, that analogy works for industry and government. Government shouldn't intervene too much, but the focus should be to create regulations, facilities that is conducive for business to compete. That's most important. Competition, I think, is very important. Collaborate, because you do need collaboration. And lastly, to ensure nobody gets hurt. And here you're talking about consumers, right? Yeah, you give these vast amounts of data to companies for them to use, then there must be certain rules that apply. But again, government regulation shouldn't be too interventionist in nature. It should be facilitative. At the same time, there must be a cane at the back to say, if you break the rules, I'm going to cane somebody. So yeah, it's just a small example.
Right. Thank you for that viewpoint. Yes, I do agree, I think. Let them play, but protect them a little bit from falls, yeah? Okay, my next question actually is now to Encik Noor, yeah, from the Malaysia Genome Institute. So I'm actually going to touch a little bit upon a project that was initiated in 2010, almost a decade ago, but I think still very relevant to our topic today. So we had a Malaysian node of the Human Viriome Project, where I understand we had 69 researchers, right, from 15 Malaysian universities and institutes, working on human genome sequencing from various ethnicities, right? Can you share a little bit about that? Can you shed some light on the project? What was the purpose?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. Way back on 2010 and so our Malaysian researchers involved in so many genome projects and also including the human genome. So early days because we normally dependent on the Caucasian genomes. So that's why we come up with the idea that, okay, we have our own unique genome for our population. So why not we go for looking for the information about our own population. Because sometimes you will see certain, let's say for certain drugs, it could be beneficial for those who are from Europeans or US or something like that, but not really suitable for our population. Could be because of the genetic information. So that's why the idea to come up with those kind of project actually to come up with our own genetic information on our population. So we are started, let's say, just to share our experience on dealing with the 26 Malaysian genome from different ethnicity. So yeah, at that time we just try to get a baseline. 26 genome is not enough for our population. So but at that time the cost for sequencing is still high, and we try to get as much as information that we have from our funding and also the project that we have at that time. So we managed to get some baseline on the genomic or genome information on certain ethnicity, which is our main ethnicity: Malay, Chinese, India, Aborigines, and also from people from Sabah and Sarawak. So at least we have some baseline on the genetic information of our population.
So this genetic information is still available and used?
Yes. So we are keeping this in our database in MGI, and for those who are researchers that are interested to work on the data, and we are open for discussion on utilization, because basically the data belongs to Malaysian, belongs to our country. So that's our so we sort of the caretaker of the data. So the data belong to us, because the funding for that project is our money, from our taxpayers' money. So it's no point for us to keep the data for ourselves alone. So we have to share, because that information can be an avenue for economic growth and other purposes.
Okay. I believe that is somewhat picking up on Mr. Thuvendran's project right now, right? His aspiration to have a national DNA biobank. Can you, yeah, national DNA bank, yeah, okay.
So basically, storing the DNA data that has been processed. Okay. Just to add to what Mr. Mohamad Noor has said, the aspect of genetic data being ours, Malaysians, has to be really prioritized. That it's being understated. It is being understated in the sense that when we actually approach ISN with this GENOMAS partnership, we actually approach with national aspiration, speaking genetic data as national asset. It should be looked as a national security issue as well.
Just for the benefit of those of us who don't quite know what it is, what is a national DNA bank? Does it mean you're going to go out and collect DNA from all of us?
National DNA data bank simply means that wherever you actually acquire the genetic information of a Malaysian, it has to be fed into a centralized system that is governed by, obviously, ideally government. And this system will basically have personal identifier to the person. Reason being is because this will work towards transforming precision medicine in the future. Because if you're going to transform the healthcare system into a more smart, innovative system, like it or not, the genetic industry is in the frontier between Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0. If you apply the artificial intelligence in a very proper manner, and once you already have the Malaysian DNA data bank in place, then you can apply nationwide electronic medical records in a more prudent manner. For example, Thailand is actually coming out with a project where they're creating pharmacogenomic card for 10 different drugs. So basically, once you go to clinic, patient A, Ali, might go to clinic, and in his record will be stated there he is actually allergic to this drug, or he has less response towards these drugs because his genetic data has already revealed it. And the ability to access the data throughout nation should be made. So that's where regulation comes into play, because as I said, regulation has to take into account the function in which the data is being transferred for. In this case, the function is because of medicine, and it has personal identifier attached to it. The security level will be different as well. And as for the ethnic specific genetic predisposition, like what Mr. Mohamad Noor said, what I actually see as the main problem in the country right now, we actually have a lot of projects going on. But the problem is that there is very little effort in enforcing those research projects into something functional. Like for example, in the US, DTC companies, they are free to offer the services. And when they offer the services, they can say that they are able to find predisposition for certain drug tolerance and all. But whether it's approved or not, whether it's evidence-backed, we do not know. That's where FDA approval comes in, Federal Drug Administration approval. We should move in that line. We should move in that line. We should enforce our researchers, move towards that line, and enforce these findings in such a way where not any DTC companies can come and sell unreliable, unvalidated information.
Okay. as a layman, right, as someone whose data might eventually end up in this data bank, I am concerned that there might be misuse of this data. How do you see us addressing this fear of mismanagement of the data? Yeah, or anyone else from the panel as well. Please feel free to come in.
When, like what Mr. Raj said, first, this centralized data, it has to be under the governance of government. It all comes to governance. Second, the data is being fed in from various parties. You have to regulate and also monitor these parties. That's where licensing, this kind of factors come into play, which is not existent right now. And second is, when it comes to the government database, there is more towards the application of the data is going to be more towards the well-being of the people. People who provide the data, for example, DTC companies, they have all the rights to sell functional information to customers, which PDPA will apply. But once this data is transferred to government agencies, PDPA does not apply anymore. We do understand the distinction between PDPA where it actually stops, but we would like that to be on paper and pen, because at right now, the genetic market is really, really operating in a free market zone.
Mr. Raj, do you have anything to say about that? It sounds like it's fraught with concerns from a legal aspect.
Yeah, and I think the law catches up with technology and use. It's not always law starts and then technology comes. It's always a catch-up process. If you take MySejahtera, for example, right? It's a brilliant application. A lot of other countries in Malaysia are introducing this contact, and you've got a lot of data within the app itself. And if you talk about commercializing it, it's a goldmine. But look at what the government has done, which is praiseworthy, because the government says that we'll only use MySejahtera for contact tracing, and only for a very specific purpose. And because of that, consumers and the people at large were confident, because the government's assurance to say it's only being used for a particular purpose and it's only for contact tracing. So if we're going to have, I completely echo what Mr. Thuvendran is saying, is that, look, if you're going to have like a DNA bank, then I think the communication to the public has to be clear, that this bank, the purpose, the data that's being processed in this bank is for this particular purpose. It will only be disclosed, say, for example, for a pharmaceutical or for a medical purpose only. That when you take in your phone to go and see a GP to say, oh, Raj is allergic to this, it's only going to be used for this purpose. Then public may sign up for it. Why? Because there's a certain amount of confidence, and regulation could come in to help that particular confidence building exercise. Because going back to the grey areas, when there is a lacuna in the law, when things are not clear, and when communication to the public also is not clear, then you don't have confidence and nobody signs up. And then what's the point? If the consumers don't sign up for that particular project or particular initiative, then you've lost, right? So I would say that business would have to come up with, say, for example, what is the purpose for the processing, and then get regulations to support it, to say, like you brought up licensing, for example. Only licensed genomics processors can use that data in the database.
Okay. Just one more question on the PDPA. I mean, we're looking forward now, but just looking backwards a little bit. How has the enforcement for PDPA been so far? Does it inspire confidence that moving forward our genetic data will be taken care of adequately?
I think, well, to be honest, we may not have been as active as other jurisdictions. So the high watermark is, of course, Europe. EU GDPR, everybody knows, it's a very scary piece of legislation, strongly enforced. Then you look at Singapore also, it's got very guidelines and enforcement. From the Malaysian side, I think it's been a very structured process, in that it started off a lot with awareness. You see, JPDP has gone down the ground to educate businesses to say, look, you need to have your privacy policies in place. We want to see your data protection systems within the organization. How do you protect data? What is the security measures in place that you've implemented to protect the data that you have? it's been an awareness, more of an awareness-centric process rather than a cane. But you have seen also JPDP taking breaches to court to prosecute. So, there were a few cases where directors were taken to court for not obtaining consent or failure to register as a data user. So you've seen a good balance between educational approach, awareness approach, and also a deterrent, using the same.
I see. So in a nutshell, it's not enough to have those laws, but people must also be aware of their rights under those laws, yeah? Okay. Just moving on, and I'm addressing this to Encik Matno and also Dr. Adiratna. What do you predict will happen in the genomic space in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay, for the next 4 or 5 years, I foresee that the genomic industry will boom again. So, especially on the personalized medicines, on the human genomes, and so on, because of the advancements on the technology of genome sequencing, data analysis, and so on, and the public awareness on the data protections and so on. So I foresee that this industry will be growing, and that's I can say that's the future of our market or our business and our personal well-being in the future. So that's my opinion. So yeah, maybe 5 to 10 years in the road, you will get some things. Just show your phone. It will scan everything's about your health and so on. So could be help the medicals doctor to check what's your status and so on, and what's the predisposition of the certain diseases or something like that. So that's my opinion.
I see. So Dr. Adiratna, what about your views?
I foresee that it's going to flourish. And for your information, we Ministry of Health are actually working together with Academy Science Malaysia and also with higher education to look into this precision medicine. And we think that genomic data or genetics data, it's going to be something very common, or everyone probably will have their own genetic data in like 5 years' time, perhaps. In order for them to identify, for example, if they have any predisposing factor to certain diseases like diabetes, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, and all that. So they may want to know their information. Coming back to the question, your concern previously about your data into the DNA bank, it is important to also have the identifier of the person there. Why? Is that you probably have certain disease now, or you probably do not have. But in 10 years' time, you probably will have something like diabetes or hypertension, and that data has to has to be sent there in order for us to, okay, let's look at the genomics. Let's see if there is anything peculiar about this patient. It is going to be useful for certain diseases that probably is not surfacing now, but later.
I see. So it's pretty much like you're going to be able to look into a crystal ball?
I would say so, yeah.
So rather than going to the doctor and finding out what you have now, you can go to the doctor and find out what you may have 10 years down the line.
That's possible.
Okay, sounds very Star Trek to me. Okay.
Before with that, so I would like to share our experience also on, because we, MGI also involved in a cohort study on monitoring the health status for Malaysians. So we involved in get 100,000 Malaysian individual from various ethnics, from various locality and so on. So we keep track those their health status for 10 years. So for the first year, so we get the healthy individuals. So so we get all the clinical checkup and so on. So once they consider clinically healthy, then we put in their as a respondent for that. And then 5 years later, we go back to their respondents, and then we go back to our respondents, and then again monitor their health status again. So after 5 years, we found that they start developing cancers, diabetes, and other diseases. So why? So that's the importance of getting the genomic or genome information about that particular individual, so we can see what happened, what's the changes between 5 years down the road. So again, we need to get the data in one data bank, centralized data bank, and with the certain security and also legislation or act that protect those information and so on. So with the certain consent and whatnot. So that's the benefit of the genome information of the individuals.
So as I understand it from listening to all four experts today, it looks like we are definitely barreling towards having a DNA data bank, and that there is no way to sort of opt out from having your genetic data in some data bank or other. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, we need to have a centralized repository for our own data with some regulation and so on, and government should establish this seriously, and again we need to get some law or something that protect those data and protect the information from being abused by anybody that not supposed to be.
I'm just going to pick up on that and ask a question to Mr. Raj. Does it sound like we're heading towards legislation that may actually compel you to provide this genetic data?
I think compulsion is quite difficult. We can't compel everybody to take the vaccine, so I don't know whether we can compel everybody to give consent for their data. I don't think the law would come to I mean, this is a different realm. This is not. I think this is more in terms of legislation and how the government pushes everybody to provide these data. But I don't think it would be policy to compel. There would be certain exceptions, or the general rule is that only those who consent would have their data, DNA, submitted to the bank. And I think that becomes a much easier communication process rather than saying, you're forced to, and that becomes a very important thing when you want to promote such an initiative. So short answer to that is I don't think you would force people to provide that sort of data into this digital data bank.
Okay. One final question from me before we open the questions to the floor. It's time. Do we have time? Yeah. Okay. What are the most? This is addressed to all of the panelists. Yeah. What are the most critical changes that you feel we must make to face the future effectively in this area? Who would like to start first? Mr. Thuvendran.
I think one of the biggest critical change that we have to make is basically, like what I said earlier, supply chain. And we have absence of players in the technology makers. We need to get into it. 2001, which is 20 years back, the cost of sequencing a whole genome was $100 million. 10 years, fast forward, it became $12,000.
From 100 million?
Yes.
In 10 years to 12,000?
Yes. So it's all the momentum driven by technology providers. Now, in order for us to actually have enough market to create awareness and also to create the demand, it's in the hands of the researchers. How well it's actually going to be functionally be used. And it depends on legislators and also governance and industry players and how we're going to mechanize these research products. So as I am explaining to you the functions of each segment of the supply chain, it should be very apparent that this interconnectivity can only be provided by policies. So this is where I believe we should actually move towards to.
I think the two important elements when it comes to advancement in genomic technology is trust and also security. I think these are two important things. Trust meaning, well, I read in a magazine, there was a research done, who would you trust giving your data to? The top categories are healthcare workers, government in the healthcare sector. The lowest ones were the lawyers and and also advertisers, right? So you know where lawyers are placed. But again, it becomes important for buy-in, it becomes important for general public confidence that you have to have trust. And trust comes in with a lot of regulations to protect how this data is used, for what purpose, and the security that is implemented to protect the data. Because the opportunities and the potential for such a data bank is vast, right? But so comes the consequences. If that data is leaked, cyber hackers, cyber security issues, this is prevalent. Anybody now, as much as technology is advancing, you also have on the other side those people who can hack into a system easily and to extract this data for very bad purposes. Look at the dark web, the amount of data that goes through the dark web, unregulated, and so much of data. So security becomes very important. So I think these are the two things. Confidence and security has to be looked into when it comes to this initiative.
Yeah, I agree with both panel here, because we definitely need some confidence on the security and so on. So everybody, let's say, even myself, start thinking on how secure my data and how our data being kept properly and not being misused by others and so on. So definitely the regulations and also the security and the awareness on the public awareness on the security or safety of the data and how the data being utilized need to be addressed in order to get this public database in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of them. And security is number one. And number two for me is that probably we need to create more awareness, the importance of genomic data. Some people are, maybe they're more conservative, they do not want to reveal, but actually there's a lot of information that we can use it for the betterment of all the patients or general population.
Okay. So it looks to me like security and creating trust, those are very important issues, critical changes that we have to implement, and also good regulations, robust regulations, and good policies. Yeah? Okay. Now, thank you. I've had a most interesting session so far, and I believe it's now time to open the floor to questions from our audience. Will there be a mic? Okay. All right. Anybody from the floor would like to ask questions? No? Okay. Okay. Can I please ask that you state your name and where you're from?
Morning, I'm Richard Wee from Richard Wee. Actually, I didn't want to ask anything, but since everyone's quiet, I'll try to break the thing. So like, we're lawyers, we're the one who do the talking here. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Futurise for having this. I must confess, when your invite came to me, I was wondering what it was about. Then only when Syed Faris texted me, I realized it's connected to ISN, where we are working in. So I'd like to congratulate the speakers, especially my fellow member of the bar, who I think succinctly put the issues of data across. Personally, I have challenges in managing the soon prospective data from GENOMAS at ISN, notwithstanding the fact that ISN, the Act of Parliament has a provision pertaining to data management and data storage, but I think we are going to face some challenges. So I don't really have any question, but to actually share that I think, and hopefully the panel agree with me, I think we need some clarity on the regulation of DNA. And my fear is that even if lawyers like Nada and I go in, I hope I pronounce your name correctly, my apologies if I got it wrongly, if we go in to advise clients, my fear that we may giving an incorrect or inaccurate advice, which is very scary. But in my research, I don't know about you, but and I'm probably way behind you because you're an expert in data, I struggle to get the accurate advice. But we are very well guided by the the PDPA principles, but it's a little grave with regards to DNA. That, I think, truth be told, is the situation at the moment. Yeah, but I think it's a WIP, work in progress. Much obliged. Thank you very much. Looking forward to have coffee afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Any more questions from the floor? Ben, do you have anything?
Hi everyone. There's no question for all the panelists. Just share my idea why I'm Ben from GENOMAS, start up this company. The problem that I'm facing, you guys have been speaking up. That's why we have the RegTalk today. What we are concerning right now is the centralized data bank. There's a lot of overseas company coming in to bring they are selling their DNA kits like from Hong Kong, from China. They are exporting our DNA data back to their country. And if not mistaken, PDPA only apply in Malaysia. If anything out of Malaysia, there's no regulation on their country. So why I keep on emphasizing and approaching Futurise on this RegTalk is that how are we going to protect our data, especially DNA data in Malaysia? How can we fully utilize it for research, for medical purpose in coming 5 or 10 years down the road? I've been talking to IMR Pengarah, Dr. Tahil, regarding we want to collect 3,000 to 4,000 of this COVID patient DNA. Because IMR or CRC are doing this virus DNA, but they are not on this COVID patient DNA. And CRC in the future, I mean, they are on the run of collecting cancer patient, and they are doing a cancer patient. So how are we going to really centralize it to MOH or to any body, government body like MGI? How can we share this DNA data amongst the government body, and how can we fully utilize it? I hope that the legal, the MOH or the MBI, how can we work together to make it truly Malaysian DNA bank, and how can we benefit the economic, or we can bring in more pharmaceutical company into Malaysia. This is my vision for GENOMAS, and I hope the panelists could help us and regulate the DNA data in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Do any of the panelists have any comments on what Ben just shared with us?
Okay, I would like to comment a bit on the Ben. Okay, I agree that we need to get government have to implement this, the centralized, and it can be utilized for everybody's. And then we need to protect our DNA informations and also the samples going out from the country, because we never knows that our DNA is our national treasure. So we have to protect. Somehow we have to protect from other countries that being utilized our information, and at the end we got nothing from that. So we need to protect that one. So I agree with that, and government have to push to get a centralized facility that being utilized for other government agencies and so on. So we need to get, again, because we at the MGI already somehow telling the government that, okay, since early 2010, so we already encouraged the government to get centralized facilities that hosted all the genomic information from, doesn't matter from human, from animals, from plant, but it's a Malaysian. So it's from Malaysia. So we need to keep our national treasure in secure place, and it can be shared for benefit of Malaysian. So that's the vision of MGI. Actually try to, because we are national facilities, so we try to get everybody's in and not duplicating the facilities, the knowledge and so on, because our community is not that huge, so we need to share the expertise, the facilities and so on. So we need to keep our national treasure. Again, I keep telling that we need to keep our national treasure. National treasure can be our genetic information from our human, from our population, and also from our biodiversity. So again, once all the regulation, once the facilities being in place, and government serious on doing this, and I'm sure it will spearhead the industry, and everybody can come in, especially on the pharmaceuticals, and then we can bring in more funding agency from overseas. So it will boost up our bioeconomy. So hopefully that's, I think our role now, everybody's role, try to encourage the government to get all the facilities, all the necessary legislation and so on in place, and we will succeed together. And again, in MGI, it's a national facilities and then can be utilized by everybody. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Maybe just one quick one.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so basically, if the data is coming from whoever in Malaysia, the data belongs to the government. Doesn't mean that it belongs to just Ministry of Health or Ministry of Science or different ministries. It belongs to Malaysia. So I think storing the data is one thing. How to share the data is also one thing. People are scared to, send here and there all the data because they are worried the data may be leaked to someone else. So I think the policymaker is important here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Actually, I was going to ask, as our final question, since we're at the end, I was going to ask if there's one thing that you'd like the audience to take away from this session, what would it be? But it looks like Encik Muhammad Noor and Dr. Adiratna have preempted me, and they're already giving the key takeaways. So perhaps now key takeaway from Mr. Thuvendran and Mr. Raj thereafter.
Like what Doctor said and Mr. Muhammad Noor said, the confidence that people should have in sharing the genetic data should be there. So for that, awareness needs to be created. But I would like to add also the importance of having a proper governance within the entire policy making. Why is because we were talking a lot about the fear of people to share the data. But if you look at Facebook, a lot of people are sharing the data without knowing that their data is being stolen. And some of us know, but then we remain oblivious to it. So at the end of the day, is people really going to give a second thought on sharing their genetic data for their well-being, in which is going to be managed by government, rather than an enterprise that's going to advertise a product? That's a question for us to actually answer. Second is about the influx of DTC companies, foreign DTC companies into Malaysia, and also online market, in which we can't suppress. As said by Mr. Ben, which is why exactly we affiliated with a government agency, and we are running this DTC genetic business as transparent as possible, which is why we are also getting into partnership, equity by equity, with one of our lab partners to process the data as well. Not just the DTC partner, but also to process the data. And we are also looking forward in our 5-year growth to develop a technology. So our main goal is to provide the genetic services as cost effective as possible to make whatever aspiration that we have an actuality. So before that, the takeaway that I think I should be showing. Or as my CEO will be. Okay, this is the DNA kit in which our company is actually marketing. And as you can see, it has the government agency logo over there. And just to have a look at the inside. It looks like this. So at the end of the day, we are moving towards a national aspiration together. We are not in loggerheads with any agencies, with any ministries. We should work together. Working together goes all the way to the customers as well. We should get consumers' feedback. We should get NGOs' feedback. Everyone should be included, inclusive. And let's work this together.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Sorry, thank you, Thuvendran.
Do you have enough time?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Do you have free samples for the panelists? No.
Yeah.
So just 2 key takeaway points. One is, please, Richard, you'll agree, trust your lawyers, because it's very important to get it right when it's compliance. Trust your lawyers. Number 2, I think this initiative, we've got to go back, I think it's sounding like a broken record, but just a takeaway point is the importance of private-public partnership. The industry must go to the government to say, look, we know the key points to provide to you, to let you know, government, how to regulate us, because we know the pain points, we know the industry intricacies, we know how consumers react. So let's partner up to come up with these guidelines, policies, or governance structure that can help the government to come up with a very effective way of regulating the industry. Government is definitely needed as well to instill confidence in the public, to say this is government-backed and that government will protect your data. This is for a public good. It's for the future. It's for technology. So public-private partnership in this initiative is, for me, imperative.
Okay, thank you very much for the key takeaways from our panelists. I think we've had a really insightful discussion today, and I think in summary, my key takeaway from all this is that regulation of genetic data, or rather the genetic data industry, needs to be a public-private partnership. There needs to be forward-thinking policies from the government. There needs to be regulation, because the title is regulating genetic data. But that regulation needs to be something that creates trust for the public, but at the same time is industry friendly and promotes the growth of the industry as well. So it looks to me like there's a lot for us to chew on, and this topic certainly merits further discussion and action in the future. But I would like to say thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. It's much appreciated. And I would also like to thank the audience for being here. so early on a Monday morning and a very wet Monday morning as well. Yeah, and I hope to see you in our next RegTalk. In the meantime, thank you again to everyone, and I wish all of you here a productive week ahead, and stay safe. Thank you.